Hey everybody, I wanted to take my time here and discuss some of the ideas of the Revolutionary War actually inspiring a lot of the action and the freedom fighting that we saw within the Civil War. With the Revolutionary War, we saw a lot of the ideas of freedom and equality for a lot of white men. Now, with America being in existence for at least a little bit of time since the Revolutionary War, these ideas kind of bled over into other groups rather than just white men. We saw a lot of women, people of color, and minorities take these ideas that were so inspirational from the Revolutionary War and integrate them into their lives within the Civil War. Now, I'm going to go ahead and share my presentation here. Let's see here. Make sure I'm actually sharing. There we go. Now, with this, I wanted to start with Frances Clayton. Now, she was a woman, much like a lot of other women of her time, who were really inspired by joining the Civil War, not just taking a back seat within it. A lot of women were nurses, they participated in that way. Other women, like Frances Clayton, decided to dress as men so that they could fight in the front lines. Now, this is a really strong show of changed gender roles. Before we really saw women only being able to dress as women, to act as women. And for the first time in American history, we are really seeing women kind of take on a new role as a more dominant, a more masculine, a stronger figure to look at. And the reason why this really matters is because Frances Clayton's story, she really embodies a wider struggle for women's rights. If women are able to fight and sacrifice for their nation, why should they not be granted the same rights as the men around them? Now, moving on, we also have examples during this time, such as Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott. Now, this is when we really start to see the women's rights movement kick off. The convention at Seneca Falls in 1848. This is what historians believe is the start of the women's rights movement. Um, Now, during this time, there was this group of people called the abolitionists, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in the next slide as well. But the abolitionists were a group of people who were very against racism or just slavery in general. They were seen to be supporters of the Union. And funnily enough, a lot of them were Quakers. A lot of Quakers did never really believed in the owning of slaves. So a lot of times when we see abolitionists, we see that they were also Quakers as well. And the reason why this convention at Seneca Falls really matters is it really laid down the groundwork for women to be able to come together and discuss ideals about equality and be able to organize themselves effectively. Now, we also see the Grimsky sisters. They were also abolitionists and they were also Quakers. And much like my last slide here, the Grimsky sisters or Grimke sisters um, were strongly in protest against slavery. They wrote a lot of influential documents, letters that would eventually be published that really discussed the nastiness of slavery and how it is a bad, detrimental thing to society. With this, they took the ideas of the Revolutionary War and put it within their time period, the Civil War, the ideas of freedom of speech. They used their freedom of speech to speak publicly against slavery, and they had a lot of influence within their society. So much influence that some of their writings were actually burned at Charleston because a lot of people thought it could be dangerous rhetoric. Really why this matters, the Grimke sisters challenged both slavery and gender inequality. They linked the two struggles in a really powerful way, and their activism not only helped advance the abolitionist movement, but it laid a foundation for the future for women's rights and the women's rights movement. Now, a really strong character within the Civil War is Harriet Tubman. Without Harriet Tubman, it's very possible that the Union would not have been able to survive that time period. She did a lot of scouting, she did a lot of spy work, and she went as far to free 750 enslaved individuals during her time. I found a very powerful quote by her that I wanted to share. She is quoted saying that I had come to this conclusion in my mind. I had the right to either liberty or death. If one was unattainable, I would choose the other. So directly connecting this to the ideas of the Revolutionary War, give me freedom or give me death. She lived by these ideals. She fought for freedom every day at the risk of her own life. And because of her struggle, because of what she believed in, it greatly influenced society and a lot of the people around her, her society around her. Um, Now, why this really matters is we saw for the first time that women like Harriet Tubman, not only a woman, but a woman of color, was able to greatly influence warfare. She greatly influenced the intelligence community, at least at that time, the Civil War. Um, and it led to a lot of freedom and equality amongst enslaved people, bringing them to the North. Lastly, I really wanted to discuss Sojourner Truth. She was an advocate for freedom and equality as well. She had a really famous speech that influenced a lot of people because uh, she was a leader within her religious community. She was a prophet of sorts, and she gave this very influential speech called "Ain't I a Woman?" Now, the speech was presented at the Women's Rights Convention in Arconne, Ohio, just in 1851. It focused on a lot of the challenges related to race and gender discrimination. A lot of what she did really pushed the ideas of the Union forward. She did a lot of campaign speeches for Abraham Lincoln, for example. And she did a lot for women's suffrage in that way, talking about equal rights and that sort. Now, really why this matters, why Sojourner Truth's story really matters to all of this within the Civil War is she had a lot of very powerful speeches that sparked activism and confronted a lot of societal norms. She emphasized the essential contributions of Black women to both abolitionists and the women's rights movements. She inspired a lot of hope, and that hope eventually led to people fighting for these types of ideals. Um, Now, the Civil War, as I've kind of been discussing here, it wasn't just a battle over the Union. It was a battle over the meaning of freedom at its complete core. We see women fighting for their right to fight alongside men. We see enslaved women just fighting for human bodily autonomy. We saw a lot of freedom fighting within the Civil War, and a lot of these ideals were sparked and brought on by the Revolutionary War, and they just kind of fermented until into the minds of minorities until it became a time when people can actually reach out and grasp and try to bring these ideas into their own personal lives and make the society better for future generations. Anyway, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Bye bye.